devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into Devy. Welcome to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington. We're having some technical difficulties tonight. I don't know what's going on. They changed everything up on me. My board's all different, and it screwed me up. But we are here, and hopefully we are actually live, and you can hear us. Joined, as always, by Andy Starr and Aaron Wilcox, which we appreciate, coming at you tonight on Tuesday night. And we are diving back into that C2C startup that we started talking about a couple weeks ago. We took a little mini break because we decided there was some timely information we needed to talk about last week. Make sure you go back and check the original one out, check out the timely information last week, and then come back to this one, and we will be diving back into that C2C startup mock that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, because there's a lot of information still in there. There's a lot of players that we still have left to talk about, and I feel like there's a lot of players that we probably have left to argue about, because I'm looking at a couple here and I'm going, how is this player ahead of this player, and vice versa and all that. So I think it's going to be a fun one. Hopefully we're done with all the technical difficulties and all that kind of stuff. Aaron, you're here. No technical difficulties on your end. Let's keep it that way. How you doing, buddy?
So good. And diving deeper into this ADP, not only is it fun just for us to obviously discuss and informational for all the listeners out there, but I think it's relevant for me because I am going through the first supplemental Campus to Canton draft of the season thus far. I am 3 rounds through so far in that supplemental, and this one's always fun just because it's so early on in the off season. There's a bit of chaos out there, and there's potentially some edge to be gained. So yeah, discussing this ADP, it's going to be a blast.
Absolutely. Andy, how are you doing? Doing any startups?
No, no, I don't think so. Not yet, anyway. I might get the itch later in the year to do a C2C startup, but right now, seems like everybody in the leagues I'm in right now is just focusing on keeping the ones that we're in alive, which is depressing, but also the state of the leagues I'm in at this point. So, but I would, I like to talk about it. It's obviously good information for the leagues that are currently active because you get an idea of where players are valued. Most of these guys are probably already on rosters, so just figuring out where people are ranking them and valuing them is obviously helpful information.
Yeah, actually, unfortunately, that is kind of the state of C2C. I'm hoping that we can get back to more exciting days, but I actually just had a C2C league fold as of today. I guess technically it hasn't 100% folded yet, but I don't see it happening. I don't see it continuing on, unfortunately. And that is a league that I won the championship in last year, so I'm definitely sad to see that one go. But it is what it is. I just finalized. I always, every year I do some weird themed leagues. I just finalized the bylaws for my Fantastic Four themed league that's gonna have like a Galactus devouring planets and stuff kind of thing going on. It doesn't have anything to do with C2C, but it should be a fun one. So I'm gonna be probably doing that startup here in a little bit. Haven't done a startup all off season, so that will be fun. But that has nothing to do with C2C. More of my nerdy stuff. But let's dive into C2C because, like I said, we have a lot to get to here. We only got through basically 3 rounds, maybe 3.5 rounds on the initial pod because there was so much to talk about. There was so much youth at the top. There's so many freshmen being drafted in the first couple of rounds, and I think we definitely harped on that. We definitely focused on that. Maybe not nearly as much youth here in like the middle rounds and everything, you definitely start seeing players that have actually played, players that actually produced and things here. And maybe that's a theme as I'm looking here, and I think that my daughter just turned my lights off. Some more technical difficulties, but yeah, I'm looking, kind of seeing a theme here. Once you get past those first couple tiers, we actually see some players that have produced here.
Yeah, it's excellent to see some guys further down the board who are actual producers, and I just see so many there as you get into like the fourth round or so of this ADP, where I could see them going a couple rounds earlier, at least in drafts that I'm in. So I don't know what position you guys want to start with, but I mean, there's still a lot of value in these drafts as you go down deeper and deeper. I don't know. I mean, some of it's just, people wanting to hang on to the potential for some players who've clearly regressed or kind of flopped, and or just wanting to prop up guys. Like I even think of Pittsburgh quarterback going at QB 19, Mason Heichel. Just because he flashed as a freshman doesn't mean like he was that good. It doesn't mean that he showed anything elite where we should be drafting him as a top 20 quarterback. But anyways, that's just one example where I think you can get some value very much later in the draft, like a QB 37. You can get Connor Wigman, who's going to be, maybe a top 10 producer at the quarterback position borderline, and maybe a smidge of NFL potential. Former 5-star there from Texas A&M, or maybe you even want to get into some other quarterbacks in the QB 20 range, 20 to 30 or so, where there's at least some upside there too.
Yeah, well, let's just get it out of the way here. We talked about it in the first pod, but Darian Mensah at QB 16 is absolutely wild to me. I get that, for campus purposes, you're only looking at one more year, most likely, unless there's some kind of, weird thing, which can happen, but is getting more rare, I guess. But he should be moving on to the NFL, we're assuming, in the next class. But at the same time, at least for me, that's the whole point of this game is to move players onto your NFL side. So, why would you not want to take a high-end quarterback who's doing well, producing well already at a lesser program, and now moving up to, a better program that has proven to, at the very least, put out good CFF QBs, and then move them on to the NFL. I mean, even Carson Beck this past year wasn't anything amazing. I definitely know, but there was weeks where I had to start him, with all the double and triple buys and all that kind of stuff. And then, he's starting to get a little more love in the NFL just because, people are dying and so thirsty for these QBs. Mensah's 10 times better than Carson Beck could ever be. And yet here he is at QB 16, behind some questionable guys like Malik Washington. We've definitely liked Malik Washington, throughout the process. But I'm sorry, Darian Minson has proven a lot more than Malik at this point. Kamario Taylor is coming off a major injury, and I like him. I think we all kind of like him, at least just to an extent. But I mean, there has to be question marks there. And then, same thing with Deuce Knight. There's a lot to a lot to question there. You start getting behind Mintz. Well, I guess just to stick to with the guys that are above him. What do you think about that? And then even Drew Mestamaker, Lenore Sellers, CJ Carr, who we touched on the last one. That was kind of one that we were saying, hey, we think Carr should be much higher. So maybe we're leaving Carr as is, but those five guys, Sellers, Mestamaker, Kamario Taylor, Malik Washington, Deuce Knight, do any of them deserve to be ahead of Darian Mensah right now?
No, I don't think so. And even throwing Drew Mestamaker into that conversation, like we've seen that the step up from the G5 to the Power 4 level can be troublesome, unless it's a guy like Darian Mensah who made it happen. So like Darian Mensah is the outcome you're hoping for with Drew Mestamaker. The only difference is Mensah's already done it. Mestamaker could just as easily end up being where you see John Mateer at now in these rankings, in this ADP. Based on how he performs next year at Oklahoma State. I know it's not exactly the same. It's similar though. I mean, because if you think about Mateer, he had his offensive coordinator follow him to Oklahoma, and so there was some familiarity there. with the coaching staff, which Mestamaker will have. But yeah, moving down the list, like Deuce Knight, I'm not going to put all my eggs into one game against FCS Mercer, where he ran for like 400 yards and threw for like 400 more. Yeah, that was an exciting game, but let's not, sit here and pretend like that's just going to happen every single day in the SEC. And he's at Ole Miss now, if I'm not mistaken. That's what it says on this ADP. We don't even know if is Trinidad Chambliss going to come back and play because he's on this ADP too, and he's down lower because I think probably people aren't sure whether or not he's going to get that waiver from the NCAA. But if that's the case, then is Deuce Knight even playing this year? So you got to factor that in as well. You know, you could say what you want about the Diabell picks and the freshman above Darian Mensah. People love to get the 5-star freshman, so I can't really say too much there. But yeah, definitely Malik Washington. He had a great season, so I don't mind him in this spot. But Mensah is he's already getting the NFL buzz, and he's going to a elite program. He won the ACC at Duke. Which, when's the last time? I don't think that was like Duke's first ever ACC football title. So this is a player that has already transformed a program, and he's bringing his top receiver with him. He's getting a ton of weapons that were already at Michigan with Mark Fletcher and everybody's favorite wide receiver over there. His name is Tony, Malachi Tony. I'm like, let me just look at this ADP because there he is. But yeah, Malachi Tony. So he's going to have weapons there more so than he had at Duke. And you got to imagine that he's going to take a big step up. Is it going to be like a Cam Ward season? I won't say yes, but that's definitely in the realm of possibilities. So huge upside, and you're getting him after the 4th round, which is insane. You could be potentially getting the 101 in rookie drafts next year. And I know that's, saying well, what about Jeremiah Smith? It's probably going to be Jeremiah Smith, if we're being honest. But let's say that the QB1 of next year's draft, which is, huge value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree that Mensah is being underrated. And we've mentioned that on the last pod. We've mentioned it a couple of times this offseason. I don't know why. Even into last season, people didn't even want to acknowledge the fact that he was like a top 5 QB in a terrible class. And that was when we, potentially thought he was coming out this past year. Then he obviously stays and goes and transfers to a better spot, and yet we're still not seeing a lot of love. So that one definitely gets me. And I'll tell you what, moving over to the running backs, we'll come back to the QBs here in a second, but moving on to the running backs for now, Nate Frazier going at RB12 just bothers me. What has Nate Frazier done to be RB12? And once again, we talked about on last week's pod, we talked about how, hey, the RBs are just not hitting like they used to. We really haven't seen the high-end guys, your Usman Kromas, your Cedric Baxters, your Taylor Tatums. We haven't seen these guys hit. And so obviously we're looking at these lesser guys and saying, hey, we got to bump them up because of that. And I'm not saying that Nate Frazier's not in my top 20, but to be drafted as a top 12 running back right now, when you have guys like Jordan Davison behind him, you have guys like Dalen Smothers behind him, one spot behind him, but obviously one behind, still behind him. That's not okay with me. Even guys like Wayshawn Parker, Caden Durham is kind of up in the air. We saw a really nice year 1, not so much of a nice year 2. That one I don't really have an issue with, but what do we think about Frazier going at RB12? Is that just name recognition? Is that just Georgia team recognition, helmet scouting kind of deal? Or am I missing something with his 5.5% big time run rate?
No, he's not the most consistent runner there, Nate Frazier. I mean, he's kind of a speedy back, but at the same time, the big time run rate is not necessarily reflecting that as well as you'd like to see, as you pointed out. So I prefer most of those names actually in that entire tier of running backs ahead of Nate Frazier So you're looking at, like you said, Smothers, Jordan Davison. I don't know if you mentioned Justice Haynes, who probably would have been the RB2 in this year's class if he would have declared. But transferring over to Georgia Tech. I don't know about Harlem Berry and LJ Martin necessarily, but like Nate Shepard, Wayshawn Parker, Caden Durham, I would say those guys are for sure in contention to be higher than Nate Frazier. I guess the only questionable one, like you said, is Durham coming off of just a banged up season. He was banged up a little bit as a freshman as well, but he also showed as a freshman he's a dynamic player when healthy. So I think Lane Kiffin going to LSU kind of boosts Caden Durham's stock, even if there is some competition there in Harlem Berry and others.
Yeah, I completely skipped over Nate Shepard. I mean, I would have, I would have screamed from the mountaintops and been like, "Hey, why the hell is he not? We got the wrong Nate at 12." Maybe that's what it was. They thought they were choosing Nate Shepard, and they were actually choosing Nate Frazier. That's the only thing that makes sense. And honestly, like technically, right now, I have Durham ranked underneath Frazier, but I don't think it's going to end that way. And so, like, and I could be wrong. Obviously, there's a reason why Durham had a really down sophomore season. So, like, we cannot discount that too much. But, like you said, I mean, things are supposed to be so much better at LSU this year. I really do think he's going to get back to his ways. And Harlem Berry doesn't scare me off. Like, I was never really the biggest fan. I know a lot of people had him as like their RB2 in the class and stuff. I mean, he's small. He didn't really do much as a freshman. I'm not too concerned about him. I don't love him being there at RB16 either. Uh, Maybe Caden Durham, somebody I need to like send some offers for. Just trying to buy back in because I mean the funny thing he's going as RB20 and I basically have him as RB20. So I mean maybe he's valued properly, but when I'm looking at these other guys that are valued ahead of him, I'm like maybe he's not valued properly. I don't know.
Well, and you can get him cheaper in leagues, I'm thinking. I mean, I don't really know many people who would value some of these guys in like this next tier down of running backs. I think people are taking those guys ahead of Caden Durham as well. I don't know, this ADP, this mock draft ADP just seems a little bit aggressive even for Caden Durham, considering the market right now has cooled pretty significantly on him. And you even go up to like RB10, RB11 in the ADP data, like Wayman Jordan at USC. He's injured right now. Like he's missing time at USC. He was injured at the end of last year. That cost him. Who knows what his role and his eventual NFL upside is even going to look like there. And then Jordan Marshall, we talked about some of the, he's fine, but maybe not a special back at Michigan either. So you can make a lot of arguments for, after RB maybe 8 or 9, then really there's some pretty big drop-offs in C2C where there's just chaos going on.
Yeah, I believe the term in the NFL, like best ball world, is the running back dead zone, and that's like exactly what this is. Like exactly what Aaron was saying. From like running back 10 down, you could go as far as you want, really. But I mean, I could say something about all the guys in this yellow tier, which is like ADP from like the 5th round to maybe the end of the 6th round, I want to say. Maybe the end of the 7th. No, that's 6th. So, but Nate Frazier, yeah, he's off the radar at this point. I think the entire Georgia backfield is really disgusting right now. They added Dante Dowdle, who is also terrible. Like they just have 3 plotters who aren't really high-end receivers. And I know that Nate Frazier necessarily isn't a plotter based on his athletic profile, but that's what he looked like last year if you're just going on like big time run rate. Hollywood Smothers I obviously love, but he's going to Texas. Raleek Brown, who had a great season at Arizona State, is also in that backfield. So there's a little bit of some question marks there. Jordan Davison I love, but you could just wait a little bit and get De'Aaron Hill, who I love even more, a couple rounds later. Justice Haynes, I've had issues with him moving to Georgia Tech. I don't think that that's necessarily the safest pick, but I do think that if you're going to want to secure like one of the top 5 running backs in next year's draft class, that's a pretty cheap way to do it because he is in that conversation and he's certainly going to stay there. The LSU guys, Harlem Berry and Caden Durham, I think you guys already touched on it. Caden Durham had a bad season last year. Harlem Berry didn't really blow anyone out of the water. It's just a matter of what Lane Kiffin can do with that situation. I think Nate Shepard out of this group and Wayshawn Parker are the two running backs you can feel comfortable with, because Nate Shepard obviously exploded as a true freshman. Wayshawn Parker looked great last year at Utah, and then the season before at Washington State. So he didn't really miss a step. But I don't know how far ahead I want to get. But if you are looking to that next tier, seventh round and beyond, there are guys that I think that are much better that you can get for cheaper. Deshaun Bishop from Tennessee is the one that sticks out, very brightly to me. I see the Texas Tech running backs. I don't like Quentin Joyner up there because I think that backfield could get a little crowded with Cameron Dickey and Jacoby. His last name's escaping me right now, but it's three guys. Quentin Joyner's obviously the one coming off the injury. I don't understand why he's the number one in that list. And then Gideon Davidson, as much as I loved him as a freshman, didn't see anything last season. I'm not sure that his ADP at that spot really makes sense either. But yeah, there's certainly guys that you can move down this list and say, I'd rather take a shot with one of them than try and risk it with, Nate Frazier, especially at RB12.
Yeah, I guess we're all just piling on Frazier at this point because that one's just kind of egregious, and I believe this is over the course of a few mocks, right? Like this is a consensus ADP, right? I don't think this is just one mock. So he's being drafted there consistently, or at least around there consistently, and that's a little concerning. Honestly, I'm looking through the wide receivers here. And I wanted to say, we got to move Mario Craver up. We got to move Booby Feaster up, Jace Brown, KJ Duff, like all these guys in that wide receiver 17 through 20 range. But then I'm looking and I'm like, who are we moving them above? The only one that I really don't like in the tier above is wide receiver 12, Latsier Brooks. But I know a lot of people are very big fans of him. And the jury's not out. And I even wrongly said that he was like a low ADOT guy on the last pod. And honestly, Andy called me out on that one. It was not his ADOT. His ADOT's fine. It's his PPR points per touch. It's crap. And I mean, honestly, I've made excuses for Ty Simpson in the past, for other players like Ryan Williams, Ryan Coleman Williams, and Jeremy Bernard, and saying like, hey, Ty Simpson's bringing them down, and so maybe I have to do the same thing with Latsier Brooks here. But his PPR points per touch are really bad for a player that was like, doing decent things as a true freshman. But I won't hold it against him too much. He obviously could get better. But really, I'm fine with all those players: Andrew Marsh, Jalen Lott, Vernell Brown III, Ryan Wingo. So it's hard to say, like, you got to move these guys up. I think we're just in a point where we should probably be just drafting wide receivers at this point, and skipping some of these QBs and RBs that we're talking about, your Nate Fraziers and your Harlem Berries and your Deuce Knights and players like that. We should be skipping those players and just going wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver at the very least until we get to your orange tier, which you guys don't see the screen right now, but that's wide receiver 21 and beyond. At the very least, I feel like we should be doing that until KJ Duff is off the board. And even then, wide receiver 21 is Tanook Hines, and I don't hate him as a player. So I really don't mind that one either.
I will even go to say the top 30 wide receivers in this ADP, almost all of them are extremely attractive to me. Now, I know that it drops off a little bit, like you said, maybe in the 20s, but they're still very strong, either true freshman profiles or just in general, guys who they've done some good things before. So, I like the guys that you shouted out there, and like we talked about, like wide receiver 17 to 20, Mario Craver, Booby Feaster, Jace Brown, KJ Duff. Those are good players. But then you go down further. I kind of like Tanook Hines. I don't know if he's going to be the alpha there, if some of these freshmen are kind of cannibalize that target share. But Naeem Burrows going to Clemson, he's been blowing up in the spring, at least with some positive news and buzz. So for a true freshman contribution season, like, yes, we should be able to see that. Ian Strong going over to JKS at California, at Cal, that's a great landing spot. And same with Amarian Miller going over to Arizona State. There's been nothing but just intense, steady drumbeat and buzz for Omarion Miller so far this spring. And he's a talented guy that I shouted out at the end of this last season as like a potential sleeper if he declared. He obviously returned back to school, but I am still pretty intrigued by Omarion Miller at Arizona State. And then Cedarian Morgan, I drafted him in the early second. I think it was like 201 in my supplemental draft just recently. And I am still in the camp of like CD or Cedarian Morgan. He should have been a 5-star wide receiver in this class. He was at one point. He just barely dropped below that threshold for the recruiting services, and going to Alabama as an early enrollee as the one super talented big like outside receiver there. I mean, he's already like what 6'3", 6'4", 220. Like the guy is built, but he's fast and he's quick and he's got amazing ball skills. I think Cedarian Morgan there in the wide receiver 20s is great. And then you go like Wyatt Young, Desmond Roebuck, and then go down to Charlie Becker at wide receiver 30. Are you kidding me? I drafted him in the first round, the very end of the first round of the supplemental as well, and I was super happy with that. So I think that's a guy who's been slept on. Maybe I'll let Andy touch on Charlie Becker. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, obviously yards per route run. He's like a killer in that metric, but he's doing it with two guys that are potential top wide receivers in this draft class ahead of him. And when you get to the playoff, all of a sudden he's like one of the bigger difference makers on that team, and he's coming back. And just to I'll mention the trade that you made, if that's all right, Aaron, earlier this week, just to like give you an idea of like what how close these wide receivers are between like 10 and 30, because you would move Dallas Wilson for that pick that you took Charlie Becker with, and John and I both said, we liked the pick, liked the trade. We all think Charlie Becker's probably the, I won't say safer, but also better player at this point, especially considering Dallas Wilson's health concerns. But Dallas Wilson's up there in the upper tier of this group, and you can make an argument that they're on the same tier just because, and they're 20 spots away in the positional rankings. And you can go even further down and say Eric Singleton going to Florida, who's had great seasons at Georgia Tech, and he's wide receiver 32. Like, these are guys that could have been potential first round rookie picks this year, and you're getting them as like not even in the top 30 of their position groups, which is crazy. And then Deuce Robinson at wide receiver 36, even crazier for me. I think that guy, if Deuce Robinson came out in this draft cycle, he would have been right there in the conversation for the fourth wide receiver off the board with Casey Concepcion or Omar Cooper or whoever you want to put in that spot. And for me, he would have been in that spot. So there's just so much talent in this wide receiver college class right now. It's insane. And I think I mentioned it last week. John just mentioned it again this week. I'm just drafting the wide receivers if I'm doing a startup right now, because I can get my quarterback in let's say Darian Mensah if I want to wait until like the 5th or 6th round. I can get my running backs in, Deshaun Bishop if I want to wait until essentially like the 9th or 10th round, it seems like. So I can get those positions that I like for cheaper. And I'm just stacking up on these wide receivers because that's where the value is right now. That's where all the talent is that I can tell anyway. It's a huge, obviously we got them separated by tiers by round and everything, but it's a lot closer than people might want to admit or even talk about, because the difference between the 10th best receiver and the 40th best receiver based on this ADP seems to be, there's a gap, but it's not as big as you would see in other positions.
Yeah, I think that's the understatement of the century right now. Is I'm looking at, you want Charlie Becker, he's going at 95.2 in the ADP. The running back closest to that is Jakiron Turner, Pittsburgh. Or Mekhi Hughes, our favorite player, is right after that, going to Houston. And that's a a fifth-year player at this point who is not good at football. And I know he'll probably do okay things at Houston, but even that's not guaranteed at this point. He couldn't do anything last year. And then you get over to the QBs and you're talking about Josh Hoover, and I'm definitely not a Hoover fan. Micah Alejado, right behind that. This is what we're talking about, and that's just Charlie Becker. I mean, we mentioned so many other players before that that are going well before that. So I think right now we have we just have a bounty of wide receivers, and it's getting kind of lost in the mix, and people are just saying, oh well, I need a QB. No, you don't need a QB. I need a running back. You don't need a running back. You need a wide receiver. Just load up on wide receivers until you have all of them, and then go get your Connor Wegmans at QB 37. Go get your Fluff Bothwells at RB 37. Do those kind of things and win that way. The only one I really don't like is Bo Sparks, Texas State wide receiver 28. Please don't draft Bo Sparks at wide receiver 28 when you have guys like Charlie Becker, Eric Singleton, Emmett Mosley, Deuce Robinson going behind him. And why is Deuce Robinson at wide receiver 36? Can someone please tell me this? I get it's a little scary that he's losing his QB and it's Florida State and it's all a little nerve-wracking and everything. Can he do what he's been doing all along? But he's been doing it all along, and it's not like we're sitting here going Thomas Castellanos is the best QB in this draft class or something. People don't even talk about him in this terrible draft class. So what are we truly losing besides possibly a big arm? Deuce Robinson should not be going behind Bo Sparks, a senior at North Texas or Texas State, I should say. That should definitely not be happening at the very least.
That is kind of wild. But with these drafts, you see so often that these CFF guys do get taken early, and that's always the dilemma of how much should we weigh that type of production when it is potentially league winning. It's potential top 5 in all of college football. And going back to even the quarterback position, we didn't mention Brad Jackson at QB 25. I guess we haven't really got into that tier yet, but that's a CFF gold mine there as well, and maybe a little bit of potential to transfer up to the P4 level after this season too. But I don't see that same type of NFL upside with Bo Sparks or transfer up potential. He's at the end of the road here, and yeah, I'm totally with you guys. Deuce Robinson, a great value at wide receiver 36. And just in general, I kind of like how the running back position is looking into the late or middle 20s into the 30s as well. There's some solid players there for sure too. So the depth in drafts, you can trade back in your startups and or even supplementals and get some nice value for sure.
Aaron or Andy, what are you guys thinking about Aeneas Williams? We've been kind of skipping around. Well, we went real deep on the wide receivers, and so we got to go back into some earlier tiers in the other positions here. But with Aeneas Williams at Notre Dame, obviously we have 2 decent recruits going there this year. We have Keidron Young coming off of the major ACL tear and everything. So there's definitely some players that in competition around him, but when he touched the ball the past couple of years, he's actually done pretty well, and he's a player that I've been pretty excited about him, and Beth is as well.
Yeah, I can understand why Beth would be excited for him because his big time run rate's off the charts. I'll tell you why I'm excited about him because of that, obviously. Also, the breakaway yards per attempt is additionally off the charts, around 5, which is insane. And I know he's only had about 60 career rushing attempts, so the sample size is small. And it's Notre Dame, which, I think we're still waiting to learn whether or not that was a Notre Dame thing that these running backs are so successful, or that it's just that backfield was so stacked. So the jury's still out on that. I obviously lean towards Jeremiah Love being a really good prospect, and he was very talented. Jadarian Price, I don't know. I think that he was also a very good runner, but I don't know if he was a product of this, the offensive line, the schemes, the system. And obviously that lends to, is Aeneas Williams a product of that system as well? His yards after contact per attempt was over 8 this last season on 25 attempts, which is crazy. I mean, 25 attempts isn't a lot, but it's a substantial amount. Like it's not, think about that. If he did that in one game, it'd be an insane game. So he's great. The size is fine. I know people are probably going to say he's only 205 pounds. That doesn't matter anymore in the NFL. Like that's perfect, and he's a receiver too. The yards per route run is inching towards 2 for his entire career. He had 18 catches as a true freshman. They kind of scaled that back last season, but he can obviously do it. So I'm also very excited about Aeneas Williams, and I would draft him well above where he's going in this draft, which is still, I think, fair. Like RB25 for a guy who hasn't touched the ball 60 times as a running back, but I'm taking him before some of these guys that we've seen do things and they're not going to move on to the NFL. There's no matriculation potential there, like Jordan Marshall, in my opinion, where you're getting the RB1 for Notre Dame, which is a premier CFF position. It has been for years. And so you're going to get that college production, and you're going to get a potential top 5 running back in the next draft class potentially. So it seems like a no-brainer to take him, especially where he's getting drafted right now.
Yeah, Aeneas Williams, no-brainer there for sure in the mid-20s. In fact, I drafted him. You guys are really loving my supplemental draft. Thanks for all the praise here, because I drafted, like I mentioned, Charlie Becker at 110. Then I went Cedarian Morgan, Alabama wide receiver freshman, at 201. And then 202, I traded up to get Aeneas Williams, Notre Dame running back. I traded up to actually get both those picks because I knew Aeneas, like you said, I mean, it's just a gold mine for fantasy production. There's certainly a chance he gets some NFL draft capital. We see the riches, the year after year production, and some NFL opportunity that these guys are getting. Going back to Kyron Williams and now Jeremiah Love and even Jadarian Price. So, yep, I like him being next up. You'll see in this tier there's also Jonas Walton, and then the next tier down, another running back at Notre Dame, another true freshman, Javion Osborne. Right now, Osborne is the value, but he's out in the spring, so I get why Walton is getting a little bit more praise, and I haven't heard a lot of hype per se, but he's at least getting some playing time, which is nice for, maybe the RB2 role at Notre Dame in the future there. But within this tier, I mean, I think that at RB30, like Darius Taylor was being talked about as a top 5 running back in all of Devy last year. And I understand, like the guy has not stayed healthy, but let's say he just has this season where he's actually able to avoid those soft tissue injuries and continues on with his pretty dominant production when he's on the field. Like Darius Taylor could be both productive for your CFF purposes and from an NFL standpoint. I could see him being maybe a day 2 guy. And you could say some of the same things for Deshaun Bishop, who has a cleaner bill of health than Darius Taylor, but he's going to be a very much prominent rusher and producer at Tennessee. They're going to rely on him. So Deshaun Bishop there is really solid as well at RB32. I agree with what Andy said earlier. That's a good shout out at the running back position.
Yeah, I like it, and obviously we're taking Aeneas Williams over Nate Frazier, right. Yes, I'm getting yeses.
I am for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
Yes.
I'm getting nods, I'm getting laughs, and yes. And so, Aeneas Williams going to RB25, Nate Frazier going at RB12. If we haven't hammered that home just yet, hopefully that was the one that does it for you. Let's get back into the QBs. We kind of got away from them for a little bit. We talked about Darian Mensah, Diabell. We kind of left off at Dante Moore. We're not the biggest Dante Moore fans, but at QB 18, I mean, that actually doesn't seem that bad. It's like I've been one of the probably biggest detractors of Dante Moore. I don't hate it at QB 18.
So I want to just say that that's probably a symptom of these mock drafts running during the time that everyone assumed Dante Moore was going to go pro, because I don't think if you go to drafts today that Dante Moore is falling down that far. So I don't know how much stock to put in that QB, whatever he is, 18.
Yeah, QB 18. That's very
Yeah.
fair, and that's actually a great point. That's why I said, hey, I actually don't mind it, but where he's probably going to go in a real draft, I probably would mind. Mason Heinschel, get the hell out of here. Damon Williams, I mean, he's never going to be an NFL QB. I definitely don't mind him. He's a fun CFF QB, so don't mind that pick. Cedric Bailey, decent. DJ Lagway, get the hell out of here. You'll never be on my team ever again. Uh, Brennan Sorsby, no. Bear Bachmeyer had some like flashes, but I think we're already kind of I think we're already kind of beyond the Bear Bachmeyer days, right? Like 2.7% big time throw rate, 8.5 intended air yards. I don't think this guy's ever going to be much of anything unless he gets the Felix Sharp, BYU QB treatment that Felix loves to do. Jackson at Texas State, that you're going for the CFF upside there. Byram Brown going to Auburn is kind of interesting because obviously he's been an absolute stud for CFF purposes, but we never really truly expected much in the NFL. Now he's going over to Auburn. What can we expect with that? Aaron, do you have any? I mean, do you have any expectations for Byram here in year 5 or 6?
Yeah, I don't think Byron Brown is a NFL quarterback by any means, just a CFF option. So a little bit high for a guy who has 1 year of college football left, transferring up a level in competition. So now in the SEC, he's not going to be able to run on defenses quite as effectively, I would think, as he was in Florida at lower level of competition there at USF. So what I would say about this tier is I actually don't mind Brendan Sorsby taking a stab at, just a little bit of potential there in the QB 20s. Going to Texas Tech should be a really good team this next year still. And I'm not willing to write off Bear Bachmeyer yet. Like, yes, he needs to do some work, but as a true freshman doing what he did and showing that nice mobility as well, there's intrigue there. I mean, I think that's a fair range for a guy like that to be going in. You get multiple years of campus production too. And same with like Brad Jackson, you get multiple years and even a potential for a transfer up at some point, but just league winning upside versus Byron Brown. I think this transfer up could actually hurt his CFF upside. And again, I'm not too enamored with his pro prospects. I understand the mobility upside and all that, but I'd rather. I mean, I guess it just depends how set you are on trying to compete on the college side. I think there's other ways to go about it and be a competitive college producing team and still try to go for some NFL dudes. So anyways, I even think that like Josh Hoover there in this tier at Indiana, like he's going to be a top producer. I mean, you look at what the last two quarterbacks have done at Indiana. They have awesome weapons this year. And you look at even what Rourke did. I mean, Rourke, when you look at some of the metrics, he was not that far off of what Mendoza did, which was insane to say and to think about because Mendoza's going to go 101 in the draft. But I think that Hoover, despite his flaws, could be definitely a riser for like kind of that sleeper, maybe like a Ty Simpson level prospect, right? He's got some flaws for sure, but he could be a big time riser. So to get him almost at QB 30 is awesome considering his CFF upside. And then that's not even mentioning Faison Brandon, true freshman Tennessee quarterback, who I know, John is a fan of. I am really coming around to because I mean I could see him winning the job this season. Like he's an early enrollee. He's impressing already in camp. Like the frame's a little bit better than what we thought going in. So when you start talking about these guys in January, it's like, yeah, well, maybe he'll be good someday. But there are signs that he's already impressing, and they just don't have a lot of proven talent at the quarterback position at Tennessee. It's a weird system. I know it's not a great pro system typically, but he could buck the trend.
Well, yeah, and that was kind of where I was focused on was Faison Brandon there at QB 27, 91.4 for ADP. And you're talking about whether I know a lot of people, like I think Aaron originally said he had him as his QB 5 or 6 in the class. Maybe he's rising, hopefully he's rising at this point because I had him as my QB 1. And so but think about it, whether you have him at QB 1, QB 3, or QB 6 in the class. You're talking about Dia Bell going at 56.2. You're talking about Jared Curtis going at 26.2. We talked about Keyshawn Henderson 15.4. We talked about how these young players are getting way overdrafted in those first couple rounds, and we're like, draft proven players there because we have no idea. We've seen too many 5-star QBs just completely flame out and end up in G5 and even FCS programs over the years to be drafting them at 15.4. You start getting into 91.4, you start getting into QB 27. Yeah, give me Faison Brandon, and I mean over DJ Lagway, over Brendan Sorsby, Bear Bachmeyer. Yeah, I don't mind what you said. Bachmeyer had flashes as a freshman, but I'm still taking a 5-star prospect in Faison Brandon well over him. And even going into the next the next tier here, give me Bo Bentley going to Oklahoma. I'm taking him over a lot of those guys as well. And I'm not saying that Bentley's completely guaranteed anything, but you're talking about a 4-star prospect going to Oklahoma. Yeah, I'm taking that over, your 3-star going to BYU most days of the week, especially when we've already seen him not be bad, but not be great.
So I'm just gonna speak about kind of the quarterbacks in general. Like, obviously, Arch Manning is a guy that you would be comfortable taking for NFL upside. I can get on board with the JKS. Um, Julian Sayin is a guy that I like, and then I'm just going down the list. Like CJ Carr, I would take because I believe he has NFL upside. Darian Mensa, and then I kind of look at the QBs in other than those guys as either the 5-star guys or people that are going to score points for me on the college side. So if you need to go and add somebody like Brad Jackson because you want to score points, that's fine with me. Even Josh Hoover, like Aaron was talking about, until somebody figures out Kurt Cignetti's offense, he seems to be a safe bet to score a lot of points this season. And then I'm just gonna harken back, like instead of taking, oh well, maybe Lenore Sellers will figure it out this year and he will be QB1 again. That's the time when you're thinking that, go grab one of those wide receivers because that's what it is. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 quarterbacks that I feel comfortable saying, like, I think that they have an NFL potential, NFL first round potential right now. And I can't say it about the 5-star freshmen, but I understand why you would take those players because, you're either going to take the dart, throw them now, or you're never going to have them. And obviously, one of those 5-star guys is probably going to be good at some point. So I like Aaron and John's idea of waiting on a Faison Brandon versus taking a Keyshawn Henderson or a Jared Curtis earlier. When you could get one of those elite or I don't know, I just said a leader, but one of those top tier wide receivers before you take a risk on a guy who the data's out there. It's like a 30% hit rate on the 5-star QBs versus we know what we have with these wide receivers. The hit rates are going to be a lot higher on those guys, and you can wait and get 5-star QBs where their hit rates are the exact same 6-7 rounds later. So that's kind of how I feel about these QBs. I don't mind if you want to, because for me, it's hard to say that any QB is a stone cold lock for the NFL. Like I said, I can maybe name 4 or 5 guys that I really believe in right now. So if you want to take a QB and say like, hey, he's on a good team, I think he's going to score a lot of points, I want to try and win my campus side, I'm going to take this guy right here because that's where he's going. He's going to score a lot of points. That's fine. But if you're like saying, maybe I'm trying to find a guy, maybe Kamario Taylor, maybe Drew Mestamaker. I already mentioned Lenore Sellers. Maybe Mason Heinschel figures it out. Maybe Bear Bachmeyer figures it out. I like Bear Bachmeyer too, but you're gambling on those guys figuring it out this year, which we've seen isn't like the odds aren't in your favor. Like it's not a coin flip even. So if you're at that spot in the draft, do you want to take this less than a coin flip that maybe they figure it out, or are you going to take a wide receiver where it's at least a coin flip, maybe better, and you could even throw some running backs into the mix too. With this, I know we talked about a few of them already. That's when you go for those other positions, because it's not a safe bet to go for any of these quarterbacks beyond the guys that you really feel comfortable projecting into the NFL, unless you're just saying like, hey, I know these aren't NFL quarterbacks. I want a guy that's going to score 40 points a game, and that's why I'm drafting him here.
I think Andy said it best when he said, why pay the 20-ounce bottle prices when you can get the 2-liter for just a little bit more, right? I think that's what you were trying to say when you said a liter, right?
A liter, exactly. Yeah, liter of cola.
Oh man. All right, so we're sitting here at the 50-minute mark. I promised myself that we were going to talk about some tight ends tonight, and so we're going to do it. And then I'm going to get us into our favorite players of the tier, 4 and beyond. But there's some actual tight ends that are being drafted here. First of all, the first tight end that's being drafted should not be drafted, and that's it. Trades Green going at 59.2. Yeah, don't do that. Just don't do it. Lincoln Cure going at 66. Don't do that. Let's not do those guys. But then you get a Jamari Johnson and at tight end 3, 102.6 ADP. So you're talking about, you're grabbing guys like Malcolm Simmons, you're grabbing guys like Mekhi Hughes, you're grabbing guys like Micah Alejado, and instead you're drafting Jamari Johnson. Yeah, do that. There's a reason to believe that Jamari Johnson's actually better than Kenyon Sadiq. And it's absolutely possible with what we saw on the field from last year. Jamari Johnson was more important in the playoffs. I'm not saying that he's the perfect tight end or anything like that, but I have him pretty high in my ranks here, and I definitely would be taking him here at 102, and then Terrence Carter at 106. But then you start getting into some of these like freshman recruits after that, and I think we'll stop with those 4, see what you guys like, and then we can get into some of the freshman recruits, because I think that's where it starts getting a little interesting. Is they're going really late, and I think we should probably bump some of them up, because we're talking about like high end freshman recruits going to really good programs.
Yeah, I'm always very wary of the freshman tight end recruits. It's just the hit rate for me. It's just been historically awful, and it takes so many years for these freshmen to pay off. So even the highly touted ones coming out, it's like, yeah, maybe like 1 out of 6 will hit. Do you really want to draft a couple and then go 0 for 2 with those kinds of percentages? And even the hits, I mean, they might end up being the Lawson Luckies, the Oscar Delps of the world, where they weren't really a hit. They kind of did something. For me, like I think you said it well, like Jamari Johnson is a great tight end at Oregon. He has the potential to be great. So far, he's been good, right? And sharing time with Kenyon Sadiq. Well, Sadiq's moving on, so I think Jamari will be able to step into an even more prominent role as a good pass catching tight end. But I don't think it's right to brush over Trades Green and say, don't draft that guy. I think at that ADP, it's fair to say, if he's in the top 60 in drafts, that's too lofty. But the guy has pretty immense receiving upside. I think his trajectory is definitely heading up. So I have Trades Green pretty high, but I like the Jamari Johnson take. For C2C purposes, I'm fading Lincoln Cure at that price. I get he was an awesome prospect coming out, but just has not done it yet. And then I am going to draft a guy at tight end 8, DJ Vanami, if I'm saying his name correct, from Iowa. I'm in love with the guy. I drafted him in the 3rd round of this supplemental draft that I've been talking about tonight. And yeah, I don't know if that's high. I didn't think it was too high by any means. Like Jamari Johnson was off the board at that point. He's the next tight end where I'm like, this guy, the ceiling is super high, and the CFF floor should be actually pretty solid as well. So, I'm excited for DJ Vanam, and I guess those are the big guys I wanted to highlight: Trades Green, Jamari Johnson, DJ. I understand that there's others, some freshmen that maybe you guys will get into. I don't think J.J. Buchanan for Michigan will ultimately be a tight end. That's why I don't consider him quite up there, because he's classified as a wide receiver on their website. and he's running with the wide receivers. So he is
Okay.
a Jack Besh type of guy who may get some eligibility at the tight end position for
Yeah, I was gonna
C2C
say,
leagues,
but for
but
for
yeah,
C2C, you might that might be a
might
that
lose
might
it.
be like a secret there, you know.
Right, yeah, he might lose it. I think is the fear with Fantrax if the team starts listing him more as a wide receiver. So yeah.
Well, I was gonna ask. So you stole my thunder there. I was gonna ask about JJ Buchanan. I don't really understand why he's going as tight end 12. He's my tight end one overall in Devy Beth. Now maybe obviously if switching to wide receiver changes that, but I don't know that that's what's being portrayed here or conveyed here in this ADP. Because he's still being drafted as a tight end in this ADP, and you're talking about 157. We can't even get hardly into any of the other players that are even in that range. I mean, like you have your like Jake Fett, Liam Zarka, Michael Hawkins, like those kind of guys as QBs. That's really all I can see that gets cut off there. So I don't know, but I was going to ask you about JJ Buchanan, about DJ Voname, and Elias Williams. Elias Williams isn't even in this at all, is he? I don't even see his name. And I know that we got some high end recruits going to Georgia this year, and maybe people are concerned about that. But Elias Williams kind of showed out, at least in a small way, as a true freshman recruit. Like you said, these tight ends take time, so when they do something, we should reward them for it. He's not even being mentioned here. But then you have guys like Mark Bowman, Ian Premier, that are true freshmen this year that are going well ahead of him. So, or well ahead of Voname, well ahead of Buchanan, all that. If you're against drafting the tight end recruits because you're like, hey, it takes too long, I'd rather trade for him later. I get that. I'm fine with that. Although I really do like Bowman and Premier. But Voname should not be going at tight end 8. In fact, Trey'Dez Green should not be going ahead of Voname, in my opinion. And I mean, I guess the Buchanan thing's up in the air. That is news that I did not have, so I appreciate that from Aaron. We'll have to go back and get back to it and see what happens there. But yeah, I still think that both of those players should be drafted a little earlier. Andy, do you have any tight end knowledge for us here?
Well, I dropped it in our chat like, hey, I hate to tell you guys, but DJ Voname is the tight end one right now. He's an Iowa tight end. His yards per route run is elite level. His market share was great. I believe he was a redshirt freshman last year, which it's tight end doesn't really make much of a difference to me. And he's doing it at Iowa, where they're going to be maybe the top passing option in that offense. Can someone explain to me Lincoln Kier? Because I've been curious for a long time. Like, why is Lincoln Kier
I think
going?
it's what Aaron's talking about. He was so hyped as a recruit, and then people just can't get over that hype. He hasn't done nearly enough to really warrant any of it, but I think that's what it is more than anything. I don't want to speak for Aaron, but I think that's kind of what he was alluding to.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, no,
confusing
no,
to me.
he's for sure just kind of riding off of his high school recruiting pedigree and all the hype for so long with Lincoln Kier. And I get it, it's a fine spot, but he's not even going to be the tight end one there this year unless something crazy happens because Garrett Oakley at Kansas State should be able to resume that role or at least, really share that production. And I'm kind of fearful of that for so many tight ends. I mean, you see it through the years. I mentioned a couple guys at Georgia, and I know you mentioned Elias, but I mean, he's still going to be sharing that, tight end room with some pretty talented dudes all in all and experience in Lawson Lucky, if nothing else. So, yeah, I get pretty afraid when you start looking at like Mark Bowman at tight end 5, but I get it. I mean, the guy is very athletic. I mean, he's kind of awesome, but it took. Well, Deuce Robinson is a very unique example, but like when has USC and Lincoln Riley in the recent past put out great tight end production and really featured them in a traditional role, like developed them into NFL potential? It took Deuce Robinson having to transfer out and switch positions to wide receiver to actually matter. I'm not saying Mark Bowman's that way. Like he's a tight end. He's not. There's no question about that. But yeah, I guess he's on campus already, so that there's reasons to like him. Ian Primer going to Notre Dame. I get the hype there for sure, but you start going down and it's like, I just don't like drafting freshman tight ends. I'm really against it. I think there's guys who have done some things production wise, little flashes here or there that you can draft later.
Yeah, and I remember when Michael Mayer came out of Notre Dame, Eli Raridan was like the hot name everyone was drafting after that season. Like, oh, he's going to take over from Michael Mayer. And now Raridan, he's going to the NFL with no fanfare whatsoever. But to get back to the tight ends,
he also tore his ACL twice. So that
well,
but I mean, the point stands.
Yeah.
The point stands. But I'm just saying,
yes.
Let's give him a little credit.
there is, yes, obviously. I think the only time anyone was like pleased that they took a tight end freshman recruit coming out was when Brock Bowers came out, and people were happy with that, obviously. But I'm just going down the list. The only other name besides Vonemi that sticks out to me as like somebody that I would like to draft is Boston College's Chudzinski. He's a guy that, true freshman last year, had like a 10% market share. But Reed Harris is obviously moving on. Lewis Bond is moving on. So there's some opportunity in that offense. And he was great on a per route basis, which is obviously something that I like. So if he can, lock down some sort of starting role there and progress and turn his 300-yard season into a 600-yard season this year, maybe even more than that, then we're talking about a guy who is definitely somebody who's going to be on NFL radars. I think the starting tight end from last year, Franklin, is also moving on, but Jeremiah Franklin had like 500 yards receiving, so he's gone. So there's some opportunity for this Chudzinski guy who, like I said, yards per route run. It's something that like I look at to say like who's the guy that only had maybe a 10% market share in their first year, who's going to explode in year two. That's a guy that I would be comfortable taking. I'm looking at the ADP here. Chudzinski, he was drafted, which I guess I'm not surprised by, but tight end 34 at pick 187 point. And it looks like all these guys are 187.
Yeah, that's like barely drafted.
So basically, it means like he was probably taken in like 1 out of 6 of the drafts or something. So he's probably getting undrafted a lot of the times. So I'll throw that name out there, Kalen Chudzinski, who, he did okay. True freshman year, 300 yards. That's nothing to sneeze at for the tight end position. So he would be another guy. But Vonemi, who Aaron mentioned, we've talked about privately between us three. That's the guy that you want. He's the guy that's going to be the tight end that people are talking about in the NFL draft as early as next season, potentially.
Steele at 136 and tight end 8. He should be ahead of Tradez. He should be ahead of Cure, Jamari Johnson, Terrence Carter, all those guys. Vonemi is the dude, and Kalen Chudzinski is Debbie Beth's tight end 5. So I don't look at yards per route run, but yet somehow, some way, we are meeting in the middle here, Andy and I. All right, guy. Aaron, did you want to talk about the tight ends a little more, or are you ready to get into our favorite players of the second draft here?
From a tight end standpoint, I think Benjamin Brahmer really does deserve a shout out there. Former Iowa State guy, now going over to Penn State. And we know what Penn State does for athletes. I believe Rapley still is there at Penn State as well, but I've never been quite as enamored with him as most others. But Brahmer going over, I have him more as like a top 6, 7 range tight end, in my opinion. I think that there is definitely some intrigue there with a couple of other guys. Like, I'm not going to say he's a star, but Decker DeGraff, he could be could have a solid future. I will say that Dorian Thomas Mason Mini, there's this big discrepancy. I don't even think Mini is on this ADP for Cal, but both of those guys could be productive tight ends for Cal. Ultimately, I know Dorian Thomas was a target hog, but not super efficient. But going into Cal with JKS, I could see some nice production out of that passing game in general and with the tight ends. Hunter Andrews, kind of a sleeper guy at Utah. Brady Foley, breakout guy from Louisville. He's kind of interesting late in drafts. So transferring into Louisville, he was doing that at the G5 level. So to be determined if he can actually keep that up. But yeah, no, I think the tight end position can be kind of nasty, like kind of gross, right, in many different ways. And there's different ways to attack it. But from a CFF standpoint, there's some guys that we didn't even mention here tonight that people can chase after too. So yeah, let's shout out a couple of guys here though, John.
All right, so the rules I'm giving you guys, the listeners won't know what this means, but you guys will. It has to be orange and below on our sheet, and you have to choose your favorite pick. You get one. I know I technically cheated last time. I will try my best not to. You get one this time. Who's going first, or am I?
So one more time on the rules for this pick.
It has to be orange level or below. So,
Okay.
you're looking at DJ Lagway and below for QB, Quentin Joyner and below for RB, and Tanook Hines and below for wide receiver, and Jamari Johnson and below for tight end.
I can go first. So
Okay.
I'm not going to use the wide receivers because, for one, I feel like they're not right. I think that sometimes people just forget people are available, and then this ADP. So, and then Charlie Becker, I think, is going to be a huge riser as we move on throughout the offseason. Obviously, if you could get him at wide receiver 30, that'd be great. And same thing with Deuce Robinson at 36. That'd be awesome. So I'm going to go with something that I think is more realistic, and that is Deshaun Bishop, who I talked about earlier at running back 32. I think he's probably the most explosive running back that's going to be eligible for the 2027 draft based on what we've seen so far. Just going off a big time run rate, breakaway yards per attempt. He can catch the ball. I know I love Justice Haynes. I love Hollywood Smothers. But both of those guys I have questions about based on where they're at. I obviously love Ahmad Hardy as well, but this is a guy that has been doing it for Tennessee for going on 3 years now, and he's got the size. The only thing that holds you up is obviously the helmet scouting, because these Tennessee running backs, despite how great they've been for the last 3 or 4 years, have not panned out as NFL running backs. And I try to not think about that because it's not something you should think about. So if you're getting this guy at running back 32 and he's still, potentially going to be a day 2 pick next year, I think you got to do it.
I was definitely looking at Deshaun there as one of my options. So I love the call out. He's so much higher in Beth. I know Tennessee running backs haven't quite lived up to the standard, but I don't think it's necessarily been their fault. Wright hasn't, has dealt with some injuries. Samson had really not gotten a shot and is on one of the worst teams in the NFL. So, I don't know that we've truly seen all these players play up to their potential. So I don't know that I'm going to hold that against Bishop, but I think that's what's happening here is people are holding that kind of stuff against a guy like Deshaun. Aaron, who is your favorite pick in this draft? The second part of the draft, I guess I should say.
Yeah, exactly. For guys going later in ADP, and I know Andy, he has some shame. He's trying to be a great sport about picking a guy who's not obvious. I'm just gonna go with an obvious guy. We already shouted him out. Andy already even mentioned him here. Like he considered the guy. I'll say it, Charlie Becker, Indiana wide receiver, because I'll say it until his ADP goes up. And I know it's like don't force his ADP up, right? Don't be dragging him up so high in drafts. But it's gonna happen sooner or later. We might as well be the guys who are very high and encouraging the I guess the rise, the praise the attention that he deserves. So Charlie Becker, Indiana wide receiver, set up for a big time season, a value in drafts at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, that's an easy one, but a good one. There's no reason he should be going at wide receiver 30. That is just crazy. Aaron just got done telling you in a real draft in real life, real life fantasy football, I guess I should say, but in a real draft, he took Charlie Becker in the first round or traded to get Charlie Becker while in the first round, and so that just shows you how he believes in him. How I guess we really all, I think we're all pretty close in how we feel about Becker there. I like Bishop. I like Becker. Those were definitely two on there. You know what? I lied. I'm going to talk about two players because that's what I do. I totally lied. Yeah, they acted shocked for a second and then they were no longer shocked. I already talked about him, so it's kind of half cheating. There's Deuce Robinson at 36, wide receiver 36 is absolutely ridiculous. He should never be at wide receiver 36. That's all I'm going to say about that. So technically, I'm not cheating here. I already talked about this player, but Faison Brandon is my favorite pick in this range. QB 27, 5-star. Aaron mentioned how he's already shining in practices. It looks like there's a good chance that he's going to win this job in year one. And we have wide receivers we're excited about. We have, a scheme that we're excited about. It hasn't all really like added up to NFL success yet, but I don't think we've had a Faison Brandon level of talent. People wanted to get excited about Nico Iamaleava. That didn't really work out, but don't let that stop you from thinking that Faison Brandon, completely different quarterback here. You're talking about different size, different abilities and everything. And I think people have used the Tennessee draft spot, and kind of like what I was saying with Deshaun Bishop, they've used it against these players, and that's why he's going at QB 27. But when you're looking at that range, especially, I think it was Andy that said, think about how few QBs there are that we can even say like even have a shot at making it to the NFL or whatever. At least at this point, we can say that about Faison Brandon at QB 27, and at that range, and that's where you're able to skip some of these guys in the middle rounds, go wide receiver heavy, and then come back and still get possibly a starting QB in Brandon there. I really love that pick.
I like that as well. I do.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna take one of these higher end QBs that are coming in recruits, I would prefer personally to go later than to risk it with one of your picks in the top 2 or 3 rounds.
Yeah, I think that is that. This was a great recap of all of that. Getting beyond this, you really start losing in ADP. If you've ever tried to follow ADP from a C2C or Devy drafts, once it gets to this point, you can't. It's just impossible. So it doesn't really even make sense to go any deeper than this or anything. Like this is probably where we would start losing everybody, and it's really get your guy season at that point. So obviously we have supplementals coming up. If you're in Devy, if you're in C2C leagues, I'm not even saying that I necessarily 100% trust this. Andy's already pointed out a couple of discrepancies with who was it? Dante Moore and a couple other players possibly. So we could easily see this being a little different, and maybe the wide receivers are a little bit of oh, I just don't want to draft another wide receiver, so I'm going to go draft another position right now. Maybe there's a little bit of that, but it still seems like the wide receivers are the values, and those are the players you should focus on in these drafts for now. If any of those players that we've talked about are available in your supplementals, especially your Charlie Beckers, your Eric Singletons, your Deuce Robinsons, like Amari Miller's, like I don't think any of those. I don't think Amari Miller is going to be there. But like if any of those players are still available in your supplementals, get those players first. Then go back and get your Sedarian Morgans and your other high end talents of recruits. we still love those players, and I'm seeing a lot of hype for Morgan even today. So there's a lot to be excited about with this class. There's a lot to be excited about in startups and in supplementals and everything else. So hopefully this was a good recap for everybody. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully the technical difficulties weren't too much, and hopefully this will let me play my outro video because we are cashing out. See you guys.